Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You know we love to dig into the good stuff you send our way. And this time, you guys really delivered with this article on technical writing.
Technical writing.
I know, right? Doesn't exactly sound like a page turner, does it?
Not usually, no.
But trust me on this one. This LinkedIn article by Curt Robbins, it's actually full of really interesting insights. He breaks down what he calls the 8 pillars of technical writing. And honestly, it's way more engaging than you might think.
8 pillars, huh? All right, you've got my attention. What's the first one?
Pillar number 1 is accuracy.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah,
Got to be accurate, right?
you'd think it'd be a given, right? But Robbins actually goes deeper. He talks about how tough it can be to really verify information, especially when you're dealing with, like he calls it, tribal knowledge.
Tribal knowledge, yeah. The kind of stuff that's been passed down through like generations of employees, right?
Yeah.
Full of inside jokes and weird processes nobody documented.
Exactly. That's just impossible to Google.
No kidding.
So Robbins is really stressing the importance of having a good method for this stuff, asking the right questions, really getting to the bottom of things. Because as he points out, inaccurate info can have some pretty bad consequences.
Oh, absolutely. Just think about it in terms of your own work for a second. What if, like, a safety manual had the wrong instructions? Or a financial report had messed up data?
Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster.
No kidding. The stakes can be really high with this stuff.
It's not just typos we're talking about. It's about understanding the impact of literally every little detail. Which leads us perfectly to pillar number 2, audience focus. Robbins makes it clear that technical writing is definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal.
It's all about empathy, isn't it? Putting yourself in the reader's shoes. Just like you wouldn't explain something to, say, your boss, the same way you'd explain it to a brand new coworker.
Yeah, totally. And Robbins uses the example of white papers versus user manuals. One's meant for those industry experts, the ones who live and breathe this stuff. The other needs to be easy for someone to pick up and use, even if it's their first time seeing the product.
And that's where it gets really interesting, right? You have to know who you're talking to, what they already know, what they need to know.
It's about tailoring the entire message to that specific audience. So thinking about your own work again, do you ever find yourself like changing up your communication style depending on who you're talking to?
Oh, all the time. Whether I'm writing up a formal report, sending a quick email, or even just jotting down notes, I'm always thinking about who needs to read this and how can I make it crystal clear for them.
And that's exactly the kind of thinking Robbins is talking about here, being strategic and intentional with every piece of communication.
For sure.
Now, on to pillars 3 and 4, and get this. He calls these two sides of the same coin, clarity and completeness.
Now, this is where things get really tricky, right? Because you've got to find that perfect balance between giving all the necessary info without overwhelming the reader with too much detail.
Right, like finding that perfectly balanced recipe where each ingredient has a purpose.
Exactly. Robbins actually uses a great analogy here. He says to think of it like a chef reducing a sauce. They're not taking away from the flavor, they're concentrating it, making it richer and more intense.
Okay, yeah, that's a great analogy.
And that's what we're aiming for in technical writing, that concentrated essence of information.
So no rambling paragraphs or sentences full of jargon?
Not if you can help it. The goal is to be clear, concise, get straight to the point. Because if people can't understand what you're trying to say, then what's the point of writing it in the first place? Which brings us to another important pillar, objectivity. You want your writing to be, a clear and unbiased presentation of the facts.
So we're leaving the passionate opinions and dramatic flair for our next deep dive on creative writing.
Exactly. Think of it like presenting evidence in a case. You lay out the facts clearly and let the reader draw their own conclusions.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does that actually look in technical writing? Like, how do you put objectivity into practice?
Well, Robbins gives some really good examples, like, say, using alphabetical order for lists when there's no obvious ranking.
Okay.
Or, like, sticking to the same terminology throughout a document instead of switching between different synonyms.
It's about removing any chance of confusion or misunderstanding for the reader.
Right, because even something as small as using different words for the same concept, it can throw people off. You want your reader focused on the actual information, not trying to figure out if those two terms mean different things.
And that consistency actually connects really well with his next pillar, right? Parallel structure.
Absolutely. He calls those two the unsung heroes of technical writing, and I think he's right on the money. They're all about making information flow in a smooth, logical way.
Okay, so break down parallel structure for me. Why is it so important?
It's all about using consistent grammatical patterns so your writing is super clear and easy to follow. Like imagine reading a set of instructions, but each step starts with a totally different structure.
Oh, that would be so confusing.
Right. It's like first plug in the cable. Second, you need to turn on the device. Finally, making sure that it's positioned.
Here.
It's all over the place.
Yeah, that's a nightmare.
Exactly. But with parallel structure, it's like you're setting up this rhythm for the reader's brain. Each sentence flows naturally to the next, and the information is just easier to process.
It's about making their life as easy as possible.
Precisely. And that is absolutely key, especially when you're dealing with complex technical stuff. You don't want to add any extra mental work.
Speaking of keeping things simple, Robbins' next pillar is terseness. And I love how he sets this one up. He jokes that no boss has ever praised a document for being nice and verbose.
So true, which takes us right back to what we talked about earlier, right? Clarity through conciseness. Every single word has to earn its place on the page.
How do you figure out if a word is earning its keep?
Good question. Ask yourself this. Does this word add any new information? Does it make a point clearer? Or could I just delete it and keep the same meaning? If it's not adding anything valuable, it's probably just clutter.
And clutter is definitely not our friend.
Not in technical writing, that's for sure.
So true.
Now, on to our last pillar before the big reveal, version control. And this one, I think, is super relevant nowadays with everybody collaborating.
Oh, for sure. We're all working on documents together, sharing drafts, making edits. It's easy to lose track.
Right, exactly. And Robbins really stresses the need for a good system to manage all those different versions of a document.
Yeah.
Think of it like a really detailed change log, so you can see who made which changes, when they did it, and why they did it.
So no more emailing files back and forth with names like Final Draft D3 John's edits, final for real this time .doc.
Hopefully not. A good version control system gets rid of all that chaos. You make sure everybody's literally on the same page working with the latest and greatest version.
It's about keeping things clear, accurate, and sane. Speaking of clarity, are you ready for that ninth pillar Robbins kept hinting at?
I think so. Lay it on me.
All right. What do you think it could be?
Well, he doesn't come right out and say it, does he?
He's a man of mystery.
He teases it as like the future of technical writing and says to watch for a follow-up article. But, the way he talks about its potential, analyzing tons of data, seeing patterns, even like drafting content.
You're talking about AI, right?
What else could it be?
AI for technical writing. That's a game changer, right?
It could be huge, yeah. Imagine software that can take like mountains of data and turn it into these perfectly written reports. Or even, like we were saying, create different versions of a document depending on who's going to read it.
Like having a whole team of technical writers at your fingertips.
Exactly. And that's just the beginning.
Okay, but real talk for a sec. What happens to all us human writers?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Robbins kind of leaves that hanging in this article, but it's definitely something to think about.
For sure.
Will AI just become another tool for writers, something that helps us be more efficient? Or is it going to completely change everything?
This is where I get kind of geeky, because even if AI gets to the point where it can do all the nuts and bolts of putting info together,
Yeah.
there's still that human element, right? Like being able to understand the little things, make it an interesting read, actually connect with your audience.
You're totally right. And it's something that I try to emphasize all the time. That ability to communicate clearly and effectively, it goes way beyond just one job or industry. It doesn't matter if you're writing a manual or an email or even just having a conversation. Those principles we talked about, accuracy, clarity, getting to the point.
Those are always going to matter.
Exactly. And that's what I really liked about Robbins' article. It's not just, a bunch of rules. He's starting a bigger conversation about how we communicate in this digital world.
And that brings us to my favorite part, where we open it up to you guys, the listeners, because knowing this stuff is one thing, but putting it into practice, that's where it really gets powerful.
So here's your homework for this week. Think about your own field, your own work. How could AI change how you write and communicate? What are the cool possibilities? And what are the maybe not so cool things you should be ready for?
Got to stay ahead of the game, right?
Absolutely.
Well, another deep dive down, another layer of knowledge unlocked. Big thanks to you guys for sending us this article by Curt Robbins. It's been a great conversation, and it seems like there's a lot more to come when that follow-up article drops. Remember, we are always here to dive into whatever you throw at us, so keep those brains buzzing, and we will see you next time.